In 1914, Europe was at the peak of its power, wealthy and brimming with confidence.
It seemed like nothing could stop the march of progress.
Yet, in just a few months, this continent, and the world with it, would plunge into one of the deadliest conflicts in human history. This is the story of World War I, a war that redrew the map of the world, shattered ancient empires, and forever altered the course of humanity. The flashpoint that ignited this global inferno happened on June 28, 1914. In the city of Sarajevo, a young Serbian nationalist assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne. But this act of political violence wasn't the sole cause. It was merely the spark. Across Europe, a complex web of alliances, secret military plans, and simmering rivalries had been woven for decades. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, this intricate system kicked into gear. Russia mobilized its massive army to support Serbia. In response, Germany declared war on Russia. France, allied with Russia, prepared for battle. And when German troops marched through neutral Belgium to outflank the French, Britain declared war. What could have been a regional dispute had exploded into a worldwide catastrophe. By the end of 1914, the initial rapid movements of the armies ground to a halt, and the war descended into a brutal, grinding stalemate. On the Western Front, an unbroken line of trenches stretched for over 400 miles from the North Sea all the way to the Swiss border. Life in these trenches was a living nightmare. Constant rain turned the ditches into rivers of mud, filled with rats and disease. The ground shook day and night from relentless artillery bombardments. And between the opposing lines lay a terrifying, desolate expanse known as No Man's Land. This crater-pocked, wire-tangled wasteland was a killing field, where crossing even a few yards often meant certain death from machine gun fire. Enormous battles like the Somme and Verdun resulted in over 1 million casualties each, yet the front lines barely moved. World War I became a grim showcase for new, terrifying technologies of death. For the first time, armored tanks rumbled across the scarred battlefields, crushing barbed wire and spitting fire. Poison gas, first chlorine, and later the horrific mustard gas, choked soldiers and burned their lungs, causing slow, agonizing deaths. In the skies, aircraft evolved from simple observation planes into deadly fighter craft and bombers, bringing the war to the air. Beneath the waves, submarines, or U-boats stalked the oceans, sinking supply ships and passenger liners without warning. Technology was advancing at a breathtaking pace, but humanity was paying an unimaginable price. This was not just a European war. The conflict raged across the globe. Battles were fought in Africa, the Middle East, and on the high seas. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers, opening up new fronts. Britain and France drew upon the vast resources of their empires, bringing in troops from India, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Africa, and the Caribbean. Millions of men traveled thousands of miles from their homes to fight and die in a war that had little to do with their own lives, a testament to the global reach of the conflict. By 1917, after 3 years of relentless slaughter, both sides were on the verge of collapse. Then, a decisive turning point occurred. The United States entered the war. Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare, which had sunk American ships, finally pushed the U.S. to abandon its neutrality. The arrival of fresh American troops and vast industrial resources tipped the scales decisively in favor of the Allied powers. At the same time, Russia, torn apart by internal revolution, collapsed and withdrew from the war. In a final desperate gamble, Germany launched a massive offensive on the Western Front in the spring of 1918. But the exhausted German army was met by overwhelming Allied force. The offensive failed, and the tide turned for the last time. Finally, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, the guns fell silent. After 4 long years of unimaginable destruction, the Great War was over. The aftermath was staggering. Around 20 million people, soldiers and civilians, were dead. 4 great empires, the German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian, lay in ruins. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, and millions of survivors returned home with horrific injuries, both physical and mental. The world desperately wanted this to be the war to end all wars. But the peace that followed, the Treaty of Versailles, imposed harsh and humiliating terms on Germany, creating deep resentment that would fester for years. Its legacy is etched into our maps, our politics, and our collective memory. It stands as a powerful and somber reminder of how quickly the world can descend into chaos and of the profound, enduring cost of war and the precious value of peace. Thanks for watching.